Hey, greetings everyone. Koku here. About to start the show. Just wanted to hop on real quick, talk to you guys. Give you a little idea of what the show is about tonight. We're actually reading a Ron Karenga paper tonight. Karenga is asking the question: which path is the best path for Africans to follow? Is it Black nationalism? Is it Pan-Africanism in terms of global racial solidarity? Or is it socialism? A lot of folks, Kwame Ture was one of them, felt that socialism was just as much African as it was European. And what do I want to say to that is you can see some aspects of socialism in traditional African living, but socialism itself is a construct from other people. So we're going to go through it tonight. I want to remind you guys that Thursday coming, I'm doing a show on the KWAZ Radio YouTube channel. So you'll have to go over there for Thursday's show at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. But tonight we're here. We're here tonight. And so let's get into the show for tonight.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. Glad to be back in this 2022 year. This is the second show, actually, of the year. We did Shoot the Breeze. Make sure you guys check out that last Shoot the Breeze. Make sure to, listen to it, share it, give it a thumbs up. That would be appreciated. Before I get into the paper tonight, I want to remind you guys that this show, the Bitter Medicine Podcast, is a part of a podcast network, a growing podcast network called KWAZ Radio. There are other shows on the network you are invited to tune into.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the Revolutionary Matron, on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
All right. So make sure you guys are checking out those shows. The Harsh Reality Podcast just dropped a new episode recently where they are they have the co-host or guest co-host in Lero. If you're on Twitter, if you follow any of us on Twitter, you're sure to know who Lero is. She was on. There was a good show, real nice conversation. You guys should definitely check that out. The Pro-Black Perspective did his Sunday morning show where this year he's breaking down a different African country or African satellite country each week. So you guys, he saw with Angola. You guys should tune in and check that out as well. All right. Before I start reading the paper, let me just say this one thing. Being ambitious is very tough. And I realize more and more on a daily that the reason why we don't get a lot done is because ambition is hard. An ex-girlfriend of mine once stated it like this to me. She said, "It must be nice to live with your head in the cloud." And I asked her, "What do you mean?" And she broke it down along the lines of, to be black, but to be oblivious, to make yourself oblivious to what's going on with black folks, with your people. Those folks who do that are just sailing through life. Just sailing, eating, drinking, shitting, fucking, whatever. But the rest of us are constantly annoyed, constantly bothered, constantly wanting more. And that's ambition. It's hard to be an ambitious person. You know? So if you have ambitious people around you, look in on them sometimes. You know? Because it's difficult to be a black person and ambitious. I'll leave it there. The new show on Thursday, I haven't quite hammered down the format, but it's going to be a short format show, 30-minute show. So I want to do something kind of lively. So tune in Thursday. Let's see if I figure it out by then. And tune in just to see what it's going to be going forward anyway. All right. So let's get into the paper. Without further ado, as they say. Which road? Nationalism, Pan-Africanism, or socialism? By Maulana Ron Karenga. Where there is national oppression, national aspirations, national ideologies, and national forms of organization and struggle arise to resist and put an end to that oppression. Black nationalism did not grow out of Marcus Garvey's head, even though his movement was the first mass organized expression of it. Nationalism, like all other social phenomena, rose as a result of definite social conditions, a definite historical development. When Garvey called out in the 1920s, "Up, you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will," blacks responded in great numbers because for centuries their capacity to create progress had been denied. And deformed, and because they had been forced to think of themselves in terms of a race apart. When he said, quote, "I am equal to any white man and want you to feel the same way," and of course he struck a responsive chord because he was challenging the racist assumptions sold for centuries and at a very high price for to blacks and whites alike that denied human equality. And when he said, quote, "If we must have justice, we must be strong. And if we must be strong, we must come together." Blacks understood this call for strength and collective assertion because they had shared a common powerlessness, oppression, and exploitation. It sounds like he's making the case for Pan-Africanism in that opening, right? Regardless of its easily assembled list of limitations, black nationalism came into being as a collective response to our oppression and exploitation, as a social corrective, if you will, for the structured denial and deformation of our historical personality, development, and humanity by the joint investment and action of capitalism and racism. Capitalism, the organized, armed, and ceaseless search for profits, turned to slavery for cheap and mindless labor. Slavery is begun and sustained in the pursuit of extravagant profits. On the back of blacks, Europe and USA see their way through primitive accumulation of capital to extensive industrialization and an extraordinary expansion of their economies. Slavery sets in motion increased investment, insurance, banking, shipbuilding, seaport construction, and employment. Eric Williams runs down in his Capitalism and Slavery book the details of how slavery provided, quote, "the capital which financed the Industrial Revolution in England," end of quote. C.L.R. James notes clearly in his The Black Jacobins how in France nearly all industries which developed during the 18th century were fertilized, quote unquote, fertilized by and quote unquote dependent on the slave trade. In the triangular trade pattern, trinkets go to Africa, slaves to the planters, and staples to Europe, and the white man looks at himself, sees his small number, compares it with his immense wealth and power, and comes to some very vile and lethal conclusions about the rest of the world. Side note, I really appreciate when writing flows a certain way. I recognize it's difficult being a writer, a good writer, because writing tends to flow a certain way. Bibi Rodriguez is in the chat saying good evening. Good evening to you, my dear, Bibi Rodriguez. Thanks for coming through. Thanks for letting me know that you're here. Much appreciated. Right? To continue, slavery becomes not just an economic system, but is joined with racism to form a culture of total control, a social system which grows fat in the filth of its oppression and ideological inanities about superior and inferior races. With gun and whip, auction block, rape and rack, and other tortures and terror, blacks are broken, dehumanized, and totally dominated. To extract the maximum profit and ensure the minimum resistance, the black person is transformed into an object, a mindless mixture of obedience, sex, and brawn. Borrowing intellectual absurdities from Aristotle and Augustine, David Hume, John Locke, and lesser minds about the natural, religious, and social basis of slavery, advocates of slavery pull together an elaborate ideological justification for the various atrocities of slavery and get God and government to underwrite it. Whew. I like that. Get God, government, underwrite it. The planters of the South pimped and placated working class whites by selling them air sandwiches about their supremacy and giving them official sanction for their circuses of racial violence against blacks in order to keep their minds off the reality of their class position and class situation. So this is where that socialism starts to come in now. Even the North, except for rare individuals, accepted the planters' myths. As Harold M. Barron argues, quote, the planters' employment of racist appeals proved effective on a national basis, especially in the generation prior to the Civil War, only because an underlying acceptance of their assumptions existed in all regions, end of quote. This is from the Demand for Black Labor, Historical Notes in the Political Economy of Racism. The basis of this acceptance was not only material, but cultural and psychological also. Materially, the planters and the economy profited, and working class whites did not have to deal with black competition for jobs and other economic crumbs thrown to them. Culturally, Europeans already possessed a cultural bias against blacks and other so-called heathens. The religious rigmarole about the forces of darkness versus the forces of light and the need to subdue and smite the heathen hip and thigh gave the sanction, and the planters and capitalists played on that and added to it. David Davis contends that it was during the wars between the Moors and the Spaniards when the religious and racial overlapped, and the Moors were seen as black heathen, and all sorts of derogatory imagery emanated from this about black and darkness. Oliver Cox, in his Caste, Class, and Race, states that the year 1943 to 1493 to 1494 was the decisive year when religious antagonism was transformed into racial antagonism based on economic exploitation. Pope Alexander VI issued a papal bull in 1493, given by the grace of an understanding God, the people of color of the world, all considered heathen, and especially their resources, to Portugal and Spain, and the race was on. The arrogance in that, huh? Man. You and some of you folks, not necessarily you guys here, but some of our folks, period, are out here still bowing and praying and whatever else to a pope. To continue, finally, many whites accepted the basic assumption of racism because it offered a certain psychological gratification to belong to the quote-unquote master race. But even in the midst of filth and failure, ignorance, illness, and poverty, one could still feel a part of the race that ruled the world and thus always higher than the conquered heathen. right? And that's what we see playing out here in America. This is why any old white person or any old Karen will try to run up on you, right? Ask you what you're doing here. Remember we talked about that in Shoot the Breeze a little while back? Black guy in a building and a white mother and son accosted him, asked him what he's doing here and all this old shit. That's why. Viva Rodriguez says Durante Vita became a reality for all slaves in North America and the Caribbean. He goes on to say Durante Vita equals forever enslavement for you and your progeny. I'm telling you again, if you have ambitions as a black person to get up from out under this tyranny, it is so heavy. And if you are listening to me, whether live or on the playback, if you feel that weight, you drop a 1 in the comments, right? But it is heavy. To live with your head in the bubble, your head up your ass, as you typically say, it's way different. Bibi Rodriguez says, truth, my noni and grandparents going to Vatican City. You see what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying? Now, part of the problem here, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. Bibi says, Durante Vita became law in 1657. Thank you for all that information. That's good information. Right? The learning curve is here. That's the Revolutionary Matron. You guys should be tuned into the Revolutionary Matron as well. She hit 1, saying, yeah, it's heavy. It's heavy. And I'm not complaining about it either. But I'm acknowledging, and I hope everyone else acknowledges it's heavy. And this is why you got to look in on one another sometimes. Help one another out. Encouraging words. Right? Daily Affirmations by Pauline is about to drop a book. She's a regular on the Shoot the Breeze in the chat. She's about to drop a book of daily affirmations. I'll post it to the community tab when I get more information. I think you could pre-order it right now, but yeah, we need those affirmations. Now I'm not a religious person, so I don't want no Christian nothing around me personally. But if it's uplifting talking points, things to make you push on, yeah, that's needed. You know? That's needed. Mr. Untouchable is here. Hey, what you saying, Mr. Untouchable? He's saying we working on the solution, Koku. Happy New Year, by the way. Happy New Year to you too. Happy Roman New Year to you. Right? And we are working on the solutions. We are working on solutions. And hopefully we maintain ourselves, our sanity and whatnot, while we work on these solutions. To continue, the Northern capitalists fought a 4-year war with the Southern planters to establish who would have hegemony in the country, not benevolently to free the slaves regardless of erudite assumptions to the contrary. The abolition of slavery was a byproduct of the struggle, not its purpose, and Northern capitalism had no intention, despite the interlude of Reconstruction, of liberating blacks in any meaningful sense. This is a quote from Paul A. Barron, Paul M. Sweezy, from the book Monopoly Capital, an essay on the American economic and social order. Given a false freedom, with no economic base, not one mule or acre of anything, with no education, and nowhere else to go, many blacks were forced back to the plantations and were subjugated through peonage, sharecropping, rent tenancy, minimum wage slavery, and all the other schemes that former owners could get away with. Isn't this happening now? Let's be real about this. Isn't this happening now? Right? We have folks out here with a false sense of freedom, not understanding that you need an economic base. If not, you're a slave. You need an education, a liberation studies, a patriotic education, something to reaffirm yourselves daily and based on your history and based on your potential. You don't have that either. You don't have an African-centered education. Nor are you checking for one. I'm going to be frank about it. I talked about African-centered curriculum for over a year, probably close to 2 years, if not 2. And hardly anyone really showed an interest in it. So you don't have an economy. You don't have the proper education. So what's going to happen? Well, exactly what we see happening now. You're working at McDonald's, begging this white man to increase your minimum wage, your salary or whatever it is, right? You're begging this guy to increase this thing so that you could actually live a little decent life. You're a slave. And it's over these, and by the way, that McDonald's thing too, that's such a silly conversation because job pay is rated based on supply and demand as well, right? If anyone can do the job, you're not gonna make much money doing that job. That's just how the shit boils down, right? But you don't even have your own economy anyway, so what does it matter? Either way, you're gonna be a slave to these folks. Either way, right? And there's a conversation we have to have about being business owners too. That's not all, but people try to make that appear to be too. That's not all, but people try to make that to be too. The learning curve says we are deliberately miseducated. Even with a degree, we do not create jobs. Because the reality is, you see this entrepreneur thing? Let me tell y'all something. That entrepreneur thing is one of the biggest hoaxes performed in recent years, in recent memory. I'll tell y'all why. I was in this vegan restaurant the other day. Prices have been going up steadily for a little while now. And they have a sign up at the end of the 2021 year. They will sign up saying, due to inflation, we're going to raise prices again. And what's really happening there is because you don't control your supply chain, right? I could bet, because it's kind of like a Caribbean vegan spot. You can bet money that who they get their raw materials from. It's either a Jew, an Asian, or an Arab. You've already lost, and that's what you have to deal with. You're paying more just for the raw materials. And what happens with these businesses, with black businesses especially, they pass on those expenses to the customer. So every time your supply chain goes up, the customers feel that. And what eventually happens, customers start to fall off from coming to your store, and what you end up doing is basically charging those who do come for those who aren't coming as well. Do y'all understand what I'm saying there? I hope y'all understand what I tried to explain just now. So me going in that store, I'm actually paying for the fact that you don't have X amount of customers coming in to keep these prices different, lower, right? That stuff is the biggest scam, because who do you have to go to for your success? Remember a couple of years ago, there was a black woman who had some product in Target, and they found this thread somewhere on the internet where I guess white women learned that they were buying this product that was a black woman's product, and they decided to leave a bunch of negative reviews and stuff to dissuade others from purchasing that product. Do you guys remember that? And there's other stories similar to that. for you to have a business, right, you have to ask yourself, well, who am I going to support this business? If it's a strictly black-owned business, you are not going to have enough people to come and support your business. That's a fact. The way things are, the way black folks are educated, you just won't have enough people to do. And the powers that be noticed too. So what ends up happening? And I know I'm kind of going on a rant here, but what ends up happening? Because you have the ambition to be an entrepreneur, you put up your money, especially if you live in these places like New York, New Jersey, and stuff like that. You have to put up good dollars just to even register your business. You have to put up good dollars, right, to register the business, because you have to pay for newspaper advertisement. You have to put up all this money just to start before you even could see a dollar. You have to grease the palms of so many folks. And guess what? None of them is black folks whose palm you're greasing. Just to have the opportunity to do this business. Just to have the opportunity to do this business. Now you're in business. You've overcome the barriers to entry. Who is your customers? Who is your supply chain? Who determines your success? And all the reason why the reason why there's this big issue is because you don't understand. You don't have an economy. You don't have the right education so that black folks alone. So black folks would even say, you know what, that's a black business. Let me go and make sure I spend my money. We got a lot of work to do, and this searching for solutions thing is to me, that's the big part of, that's the heavy part. Remember that question I asked earlier? That's the heavy part, right? In the chat, Learning Curve said we are deliberately miseducated. Even with a degree, we do not create jobs, and that's it. Most black entrepreneurs are actually black solopreneurs, meaning you started some consulting business or tutoring or something, and you doing all that shit yourself. You don't have the ability to pay nobody to cover for health insurance and workers' compensation and tax and all this type of stuff. Bibi Rodriguez says, Dr. Amos Wilson said, we cannot continue to consume our way out of this madness. We must have and control production and our economies. Right? The Learning Curve says 100, we cannot protect our economy. Well, first we got to have one, and then we got to protect it. Bibi Rodriguez says to me, louder, 100, facts, watch the chain. The Learning Curve says we aren't even looking at imports, exports as a group through diplomatic relationships. We are told to not look at the economy in an intelligent way. She goes on to say the middleman makes all the money before you sell anything. Yeah, before you even have opportunity to really do business. You've greased so many other people's palms. And there's no guarantee, of course, there's no guarantees in business. So you've greased the palms of people who understand that there's a good chance in 2 years or so you're out of business. You're done. It's a racket. It's a racket. When you see all these guys like Boyce Watkins and them talking all this stuff, and their business school to teach you how to become millionaires, ask yourself if Boyce and them is millionaires. What's going on with their businesses? Boyce and Tariq Nasheed and them back in the day were always caught up in some lawsuit for non-payment for services done. Check the records. Now, we got to figure out a way. And of course, business is a part of is a part of any economy you're trying to create, but we got to figure this out. Sorry for that little side rant, but sometimes it's necessary. It's my frustrations coming out. To continue. Reconstruction, a federal program to help rebuild the South and help blacks adjust to freedom, began to die for blacks the day it was born, and by 1877 it was all over, but the shouting. With the federal troops gone as a result of the Hayes-Tilden Compromise, not even a semblance of freedom and protection for blacks could survive. Terror groups of all kinds crawled from the political woodwork, then to begin and sustain a racial violence that would keep the blacks in their quote-unquote place and reduce them again to strong back and willing mind. Even in the North, racial violence grew to check blacks. John Hope Franklin notes that from 1884 to 1900, there were 2,500 lynchings and numerous race riots. That's in the book From Slavery to Freedom. The federal government, bowing to Northern capitalists, which is concerned with its economic interests in the South, sought reconciliation with the South. Confederate leaders were forgiven, allowed in power, and federal aid, if any existed for black upliftment, was discontinued. The black problem was classified as a regional problem, and Northern and Southern liberals deferred to the South's suppression and re-enslavement of blacks. As Harold Barron says, quote, by 1900, Southern sympathizer and anti-slavery man alike agreed on the rightfulness of the subjugation of the black man. It was accepted as a necessary condition for order in the American state. I want to highlight that right there. Right? This is what you got to understand right here. Right? It was accepted as a necessary condition for order in the American state. And order was most essential to the extraordinary expansion of the industrial system. Jim Crow, American apartheid, came into being with a bang. Blacks were disenfranchised, separated in hotels, trains, theaters, barbershops, schools, and other public places. The Supreme Court crawled through legal cracks in the 14th and 15th Amendment and rendered them less than effective, outlawed the Civil Rights Act of 1875, and ruled in Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896 that segregation was legal. As Rayford Logan contends, practically all relevant decisions of the United States Supreme Court during Reconstruction and to the end of the century nullified or curtailed rights of blacks, which many of the Reconstruction quote-unquote radicals thought they had written into laws and into the Constitution. Labor unions also gave blacks little for which to hope. In an unpublished paper entitled "Blacks and the Early American Left: A Study in History Reconstructed," Earl O'Farry shows how the National Labor Union, the Knights of Labor, the American Federation of Labor, and other unions, as well as the Socialist Labor Party, followed policies of overt and covert discrimination, exclusion, sellouts, oustings, and neglect. He is forced, by disappointing fact, to state that, quote, from 1880 on, white racism became the norm in the organized labor movement. And why wouldn't it? Why would these folks want to compete with you in their own nation? Mr. Untouchable says in the chat, will we loyally pay our monies for that white Jesus, Santa Claus, grant you all of your supernatural desires? Hope? My thing is that this stuff, it really isn't hard to see. This stuff really isn't hard to see. There's been books, there's been film, there's been radio shows, there's podcasts, like lectures. There's enough talking about this stuff to see what it is. But again, like I said at the top of the show, about ambition, it's just way easier to be unambitious. When you're unambitious, you ain't got to think about the problems that are going on. You just think about your own gratification. You know? That's the problem. To continue. Thus, then and even today, racism permeated American society, forced a collective response from us, forced us to think race, and penalize us with death and violent discomfort if we dared to forget and acted human or American. Racism is more than racial prejudice, more than dislike and disdain for races other than your own, more than a racial sentiment. It is a violent imposition, an ideology, and an institutional arrangement to divide the world into races, to violently impose on other peoples the views, values, and rules of one race, to develop an ideology to justify this imposition, and to construct institutions that consolidate and ensure this imposition is racism, regardless of its variations. Although racism came into being during slavery, black people had not come to think of themselves as a collective whole, as a people with a common history and future. They came from different tribes, did not know their numbers or potential, and were kept divided, ignorant, and isolated to ensure the slave master's control. It took the false freedom made possible by the Civil War, the reversal of Reconstruction, economic ruin and displacement, racial terrorism and exclusion, racial regulation, urbanization, and their failure in their attempts to integrate and assimilate in order for blacks to come to the kind of conclusions nationalism requires. That's well said, but is that really true for the masses? Now, he didn't say masses here, but to me kind of intimates masses. Is that true for the masses? Did the masses realize that through all these things, at the end of the day, nationalism is required? Not sure about that. Oppressed, blacks began to organize and protest. Excluded, they began to build their own institutions where they could, gathered in ghettos, and began to believe their uniqueness was a blessing rather than a curse. We are still a minority, and we have often, both in the past and present, reacted as an oppressed people generally tend to act. We tried to integrate into American society and failed. See, Karenga's letting you know. We were segregated and tried to make the most of it. We adorned ourselves with a glorious history, a uniqueness and soul, special kind of perception from our suffering. E. Franklin Frazier argues that, quote, at first the group attempts to lose itself in a majority group, disdaining its own characteristics. And this is not possible. There is a new valuation placed on the same characteristics, and they are glorified in the eyes of the group. This is from Racial Self-Expression. Black nationalism, then, is a socio-historical phenomenon. It comes about as a result of definite social conditions and a definite historical development. It is both philosophy and movement. It is the reactive and defensive formulation of an oppressed people who turn inward after having been rejected and refused the quote-unquote life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness promised by American society. And that right there is what... That's what black folks are still hung up on, unfortunately. Black folks, American Africans are hung up on. Secondly, nationalism takes form as a social corrective. No doubt over-ambitiously, it seeks to correct errors, exploitation, and oppression on the ideological, political, and economic levels. It moves to end racism suppression of our history, to project us in our life, strength, and struggle as we really are, to bring order, organization, and collective assertion to our daily lives, and to free our productive and creative powers so that they can be used in the service of our growth, contribution to human history. Thirdly, in its attempt to carry out its corrective task, nationalism becomes a collective vocation, collective work. It is thus a call and a commitment to unified and permanent collective action to achieve self-determination, to defend our interests and develop our potential as free and productive people. Urging our people to grasp and develop what is great in us, nationalism demands that we free ourselves from the psychology of dependence, become conscious and committed agents of our own liberation. By the way, let me just pause from the reading here for a second. Let me say this too. In that conversation I had in that vegan spot, the guys behind the counter were getting upset with the conversation. And I had to tell, again, it's Caribbean folks, I had to tell the guy, listen, these conversations are healthy. One of the problems that we have is that we don't discuss our problems with other black folks enough. And not just any old black folks, but a range of black folks those who have a particular insight into the specific topic being discussed, or those who are like tangential to the topic or to the situation. We need to have those conversations, because you'll be surprised if you talk to some people about what's going on, and this is something you guys could take in your own life. If you talk to the right people about the things that's going on with you, you'll be surprised what solutions will come up. And that's why I told the guys behind the counter, y'all should talk to the customers more. Let customers understand the process more. It's a supply chain issue, this, that, and the other. And you'll be surprised someone comes along and just gives you a piece of game that just changes the whole situation. We got to discuss our problems. If we're serious about finding solutions, we have to discuss these problems with people who understand the situation and who understand problem solving, period. The learning curve says, no, the elite, clever ones betray the others. I'm not sure what I was reading when she said that. But I digress. This, however, is nationalism as an ideal, not as it is often translated in practice with its contradictions and problematic character. As every social philosophy and movement, nationalism contains within it conflicting tendencies, contradictions that give it its character and dynamic. First, trying to correct the erroneous and destructive images rooted in slavery, racism, nationalists tend to mystify the nature of our identity as a people, emphasizing its organic or racial character rather than stressing its social basis. We cannot deny that we are black and are oppressed on one level because of it, but to stop here is to do ourselves a definite disservice. Joined to our racial identity is our social or class position. It is the recognition of and political response to this class position which will allow us to recognize our enemies and allies and ensure the victory of our struggle for liberation. Secondly, I'm very funny about that allies talk. When I hear black folks talking allyship, I start to become allergic to the discussion, to be quite frank, right? Secondly, nationalists tend to mask contradictions about blacks in pursuit of an elusive ideal unity. But regardless of chitlins, pardon me, take a drink of water here. But regardless of chitlins, fried chicken and soul, dancing, doing it, and rhythm, there are basic conflicted differences among blacks, and those are class differences. Quote, blacks are divided into classes based upon different relationship to the means of production and capacity to exploit the labor of others. This is a quote from Abdul Al-Kalamat and Nelson Johnson from Toward the Ideological Unity of the African Liberation Support Committee. We either own and hire or must sell our labor to those that do and hope the sell will last. Johnson, Herdon, and Gaudy are among those who own and hire, but the vast majority of black people work or wait to be hired or fired. Thirdly, the quote-unquote back to black movement by nationalists, which Cabral calls the return to the source, is often substituted for real struggle against oppression and exploitation. Now, this right here, I could buy a pound of that, right? I could buy a pound of that, right? Often it means getting bogged down in traditional culture and eccentric and archaic lifestyles which Africans on the continent have already abandoned or seriously altered. The practical and realistic essence of moving, quote-unquote, back to black must mean surrendering the safety and comfort of philosophical speculation and cultural contentions and going to the masses to learn from them, to join their daily struggles and move them to a higher level of understanding. Struggle. That paragraph, I actually agree with that paragraph. Culture must be transformatory, not traditional, if it's to aid the struggle. Now, we talked about this. I know Mr. Untouchable, I think that might have been a shoot the breeze, actually, because Mr. Untouchable was in that conversation. Actually, no, it was another talk, but in the chat, I remember Mr. Untouchable commenting on this as well. You have to put in the factors into culture to get the cultural output that you seek. Your culture is built around this struggle to get away from oppression. You have to put the elements into the culture that will get you that end result. In other words, you have to think transformation. Traditional is cool. I'm not saying not to indulge in some tradition, but indulge in tradition that changes the adherent. If you get what I'm saying. We have to recreate our culture. And again, that requires an economy. It must be at the heart of our efforts to transform our weaknesses into strengths. It must teach struggle, not resignation, stress our social situation rather than our racial roots, and support revolutionary movement, not bog us down in opposition to white culture, while capitalist domination and exploitation goes unnoticed and unchallenged. As Cabral argued, quote, return to the source is of no historical importance unless it brings not only real involvement in the struggle for independence, but also complete and absolute identification with the hopes of the masses of the people who contest not only the foreign culture, but also foreign domination as a whole. I tell you, Cabral is one of my favorites all time. Fourthly, the turning inward in defense and defiance, which nationalism involves, often leads to isolationism, national narrow-mindedness, and exclusiveness. And thus empties our struggle of its humanistic and revolutionary content, regardless of our original intentions. Moreover, isolationism and exclusiveness can only make us obsessed with ourselves, insensitive to the oppression and exploitation of other peoples, and unable to form in principle and struggle the kind of alliances and united front we will need in order to change the conditions of our life. Now, is Karenga not spitting some shit here? Right? Is Karenga not saying some shit here? Peace to KW Don 7, who's entered the chat. Good brother. Trippy Happy 262 is here. Good people too. He said, Trigger Happy. I can't remember. See, this is the thing with this online stuff. I can't remember if Trigger Happy 262 plus is male or female. Now y'all making me talk pronouns. I'm gonna have to say they, them. Trigger Happy 262 says, I think tradition should be more concerned as a means of structuring worldview. I think concepts of Sankofa is merely answering the question of getting that African worldview back. The modernization question in regards to having an transformative culture is not mutually exclusive to upholding tradition, in my opinion. Just take the rest of what you have, but worldview must be paramount. So I think I'm not in disagreement at all with what Trigger Happy just said. I think the reality lies somewhere between both of those views. I think we don't throw away tradition, right? As you mentioned, Sankofa is to go back and bring it forward. We don't throw away tradition, but we don't throw away tradition, but we do have to look forward. I think, who said it recent? Someone was talking about this recently, how like the Chinese, for example, they are thinking, they are forward thinking. They're talking about stuff 1,000 years from now. I think that's what I think that's what we have to I think that's what we have to do. Trigger Happy 262 plus says, I was the guy in the Pan-African nationalist chat. Okay. Okay. Mr. Untouchable says he's writing good, but I want to know what the application was on this paper. Well, let's finish out the paper and let's see where he takes it. But there's some gems in there, and not that it's for the initiated, not that it's like it's gonna knock you down to the ground gem, but it's a well stated gem that I think more people need to get that. Like this fourthly paragraph here, we got a lot of people out here who need to understand that isolationism, that exceptionalism stuff, that we are our own people, all that kind of stuff. There's some people who need to hear this. To continue, often narrow-mindedness forces us to reject out-of-hand lessons and theories of other people and revolutionary leaders, and to search in vain in the far past for answers arrived at in more similar and significant conditions. Ain't no need of us nicknaming the truth. If it's true, it's true. Not white. Even if Marx, Lenin, or Conforth said it, we must take it and use it for what it's worth, like we be doing with them shoes, rise and rip off price clothes without regard to racial origin. Only this time, it will benefit our lives collectively in a more profound and meaningful way. I get what he's saying. I still don't know how socialism really helps, but I get what he's saying. Finally, nationalists tend to be confused about what exactly national liberation is and how it will be achieved. Some mistake national liberation for community control. But community control is never control of a community's economic life, and is, in fact, nothing more than a compromise and concession of the oppressor on one level, so he can continue his exploitation and oppression on another level. Hatcher punctured the illusion of black community control when he said he could himself offer no community services for the people of Gary, Indiana, for the town was and is actually the property of U.S. Steel Mayor Maynard in Atlanta. Something didn't read well here. Hatcher punctured the illusion of black community control when he said he could himself offer no community services for the people of Gary, for the town was and is actually the property of U.S. Steel, I guess. Mayor Maynard in Atlanta can't even beg or bully his police chief into quitting or protect blacks or their right of democratic protest. And Doris Davis of Compton took over a city. Doris Davis of Compton took over a city with a shrinking tax base and thus diminishing social services. We do not live or camp on the edge of this country, but are in it and have the historical task of changing it. Yeah, changing it is not going to happen. But anyway, thus nationalism must be seen as only a stage in an oppressed people's development. There can be no separate liberation, no separate peace with the oppressor. Only when the control of the country passes to other hands will control of communities do likewise. National liberation is not community control, separation, or secession, but a fundamental socialist question raised and resolved by a profound, broad, and thorough-going socialist transformation of society and ourselves. And any other solution is absurd or incomplete or both. Let me read that last part again. National liberation is not community control. I agree with that. Separation is not community control, it's not separation or secession, but it's a fundamental socialist question raised and resolved by a profound, broad, and thoroughgoing socialist transformation of society and ourselves. Any other solution is absurd, incomplete, or both. Okay, let's see where he's taking this. Let's see the application. So the next section of this paper is Pan-Africanism. I want to just take a minute and thank all you guys who are here tonight live with me. Beginning of a new Roman year. I appreciate you guys coming through. Well, thank you guys for being here. Make sure this year, not just to like the content, but I would like to see where the content is being shared more. And if it means that you have to have your own little group somewhere, or social media or wherever it is that you just share this type of content to, not just me, but everyone else on KWAZ Radio, then do that. Let's share the content more, because the loudmouths in black society that are do-nothings, that ain't really about nothing but grifting, their people share their content. That's how they get that reach that they have. So I'd like you guys to also share the content. But again, thank you for being here. I appreciate that. I want to remind you that this show is a part of a podcast network. There's other shows you should be tuning into. For example,
this is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the Revolutionary Matron, on KWAZ Radio. Have you ever considered joining KWAZ Radio? Each of our hosts shares their unique perspective with you. You might have a perspective that needs to be shared. If that's true, hit us up at kwaz.radio@gmail.com. What are you gonna do? What you gonna do?
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
yes, indeed. Make sure to check out all the other shows on KWAZ Radio. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed to the KWAZ YouTube channel, do that too, because again, this Thursday, I'm going to do the exclusive live stream over there. So if you want to catch the next episode, you're going to have to be a subscriber over there. And meet me there Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. Again, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do there. I'm trying to make it something upbeat, something a little bit lively, shorter episodes, more palatable, I guess, for viewing and for replays. So come through on Thursday and find out what it is I figured out to do. So we're in this section of the paper called Pan-Africanism. Certainly there are relevant lessons to be learned from the 6th Pan-African Congress about Pan-Africanism. It is imperative that we extract and understand them and bear these lessons in mind. First lesson seems to be that Pan-Africanism is at this point not much more than a vague and varied assemblage of ideological assertions and emotional yearnings. These assertions and yearnings fall into 3 basic categories. First, there is continental Pan-Africanism, which proposes the unification of all African states organically, i.e., under one government, or functionally, i.e., economically, on the model of the European Common Market. Second, there is the global Pan-Africanism, the old man of Pan-Africanism, which seeks the unity of all blacks the world over. How this is to be accomplished and the form this unity is to assume is less discussed than it should be. And I agree with that. And it is no doubt for this reason that there are no serious proposals available on method and structure. Third, there seems to arise from the documents and reports from this Congress a new Pan-Africanism. A Pan-Africanism that is not Pan-Africanism, kind of abstract, humanistic Pan-Africanism. This Pan-Africanism sees itself as non-black, less African, and more abstractly as a part of a universal movement toward human freedom. It is a Pan-Africanism free of its Africanness, and ostensibly more concerned with the oppression of all people. It is so general and so selfless in places it loses its name and need to exist and ultimately seems dishonest. Yeah, I don't know who's practicing this third Pan-Africanism, but that sounds like controlled opposition. I cringe. Like when I hear black folks, like you'll see guys like Mark Lamont Hill, who will swear up and down he is like a revolutionary black guy, right? But you'll turn and then listen to this guy talk about Palestine. And I cringe every time I hear black folks talking, black equals African folks talk about Palestine. I cringe my ass off. Because if Palestinians had their opportunity, they'll do to you the same thing that the Arabs have done, the same thing that this Eurasian has done. You understand? So I don't even know what black folks are thinking when they stand up for that Palestinian stuff. But again, I understand it. Because I understand to a degree, because when we were growing up, we're some of the first people to get those images. If you're in my age group, we're some of those first people as kids to get those images of Palestinians, dark-skinned people, tossing stones at tanks and all kind of stuff like that. Which of course left an impression on us, right? But we're grown now. Shrug off that impression. Right? Shrug off that impression. KW Don 7 said something very important. He said the third option, the third Pan-Africanism that they're talking about, that's Pan-African socialism. So this is where, and he's right, because this is where I'm sure it's just ridiculous. Trigger Happy 262 Plus says continentalism always seems to be grounded on the discourse of North Africa and including them, but continentalism has always excluded the diaspora. Funny enough, Kwame Ture had to push Nkrumah on this. That's true. That's true. And that's one of my biggest problems with this continental Pan-Africanism, by the way. Trigger Happy goes on to say, socialist practice, the third one, no doubt. There isn't any sense of self-interest or preservation when I see socialists express ideas about internationalism and solidarity with other people. You right? Mm-hmm. Absolutely. BB Rodriguez says, my issue is Pan-Africanism is not benefiting the descendant diaspora. We do more to work with continental Africans. However, it's one-sided. How many of you agree with BB Rodriguez's take? 'Cause that seems to be the take. I first really started hearing that in modern times from like Tariq Nasheed and them. Do you guys agree with that? Do you think Pan-Africanism has been one-sided? Right? Do you think, if you think, let me know. Drop a comment and let me know if you think Pan-Africanism is one-sided. The Learning Curve says continentals that don't like a tribe will bond with the colonizers, practice the third kind of Pan-African. This kind of Pan-Africanism that parallels the ADOS movement. You said it, sister. Learning Curve goes on to say, a continental told me that I wasn't African, and ADOS told me I wasn't ADOS. Now, you see, if the matron or myself or the rest of you guys who regularly tune into this show, if we didn't have that ambition about us, that kind of talk will just roll off of us. We wouldn't care. We'll just be about who we gonna screw, what we gonna eat, what we gonna drink, right? We'll just be about living our lives and not care about that stuff. But we have, you see, folks who are around here have that ambition I was talking about earlier, right? BB Rodriguez says, Bayesian PM Mia Motley had a summit via CARICOM and only East African nations seemed to put a little effort. West Africa was not present. Tisk. Mr. Untouchable says, I would like to have a more open discussion on BB's argument. We can arrange that. We can do that in the Shoot the Breeze this coming Saturday if you want. That could be one of the prompts. Is Pan-Africanism one-sided? If Mr. Untouchable, if you don't mind, post that in the, because I tend to forget stuff. Post that in the Discord, so I'll have it as one of my topics for the Shoot the Breeze. That's a good topic. And BB, you come through. You could join the panel that night if you want to as well. Trigger Happy says, to BB Rodriguez, quite frankly, Pan-Africanism at the moment is no-sided. Everywhere in the African world isn't having a burst of national or racial consciousness. There are organizations though, but no recognition. BB Rodriguez says LMAO. Trigger Happy 262. Does that 262 represent Barbados? Just out of curiosity. Again, thank you guys for being here, man. This is a nice little turnout for this is a nice turnout for a small channel like this. If we start to share the content, again, not just from my show, but all the shows on KWAZ Radio, we could have really good outings on all these on all these live streams too. Where was I now? It is this last Pan-Africanism that poses a serious problem to primitive black nationalists and to true believers in the unity of blacks at home and abroad, i.e., in Africa and around the world. And it is this Pan-Africanism that escapes its concrete duty to its people by assuming an abstract responsibility for the world, when in fact every real revolutionary knows that one's contribution to the world is the struggle one wages in one's own society, the imperialist tentacle and chain one chops off in one's own country. And that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. when I hear Africans talk about we got to transform the world, I hope you mean by changing your world. And thus that changes something else in the world. But you got to change your shit first. The second lesson is that surely Africans on the continent, and no doubt others elsewhere, cannot and will not accept the emphasis we as Afro-Americans put on race. Samora Machel, the brother leader of Mozambique, frankly told the Bloods from this country that he identified with us not because of our color, but because of our oppression. President Toure of the Republic of Guinea, in a speech sent to the Congress, took a very hard line against negritude and all other racial masks and myths many among us have come to cherish. Although President Nyerere of the Republic of Tanzania admitted that as long as we are oppressed because of race and color, we will act collectively against it. And he, nevertheless, said it was suffering, not race, that brought the Africans from all over the world to the Congress, and cautioned against wasting time defending the fact of our being black. Both Toure's and Nyerere's speeches were unanimously accepted as working documents and guidelines for Congress resolutions. There is, as Loxley Edmondson contends, a situational similarity in the economic and psychological spheres between blacks the world over. We are poor, oppressed, and exploited by capitalism, at home and abroad, and by racism, and thus we all seek relief on the economic, political, and psychological or cultural level. But this is true for most people of the third world also. The only difference being the particular form in which this oppression and exploitation occurs. Africans on the continent and many in the Caribbean do not understand, however, the extent to which the fact of how our race rules our lives in the USA and plays a basic part in every act against us. They are the majorities of their countries and are independent or struggling for independence. The nature of and solution to their problems are thus qualitatively different. Their struggle against racism is translated as anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, anti-minority rule. They need never mention race, even if it's an underlying question. Moreover, most have multiracial countries and are interested in cooperation of their citizens, not conflict. It is our duty to explain ourselves and the dual character of our struggle, its class and national content. And it's our duty to divest ourselves of racial references as much as possible. Rid ourselves of illusions about achieving black unity the world over and begin to unite among ourselves here and join with all oppressed and progressive people in this country to change it. That's your socialism right there. That's where I get kind of allergic to this kind of talk. I see some stuff is going on in the chat. Make sure you guys have all liked the episode. If you're here, make sure the likes match the number of viewers here. Let me go back up in the chat for a little bit. Bibi Rodriguez said her above comment is factual. Trigger Happy 262 says no, it's very random. Mr. Untouchable says I have posted something close to that topic already, bro. Okay, I didn't see it. I didn't see it yet. I'll check it out. Bibi Rodriguez says I attended the summit via online and CARICOM nations were present. One West African country was present, and this is problematic. Azuliism is here. Y'all say what's up to Azuliism. Azuliism says, I'm telling y'all, the Africans don't mess with y'all. 90% don't view us as the same bloodline. Trigger Happy 262 says, oh, wait a minute. Oh, okay. So Trigger Happy 262 was saying no, it's very random in terms of the 262 question I asked him. Okay. Now I'm following. So Zulism says Africans don't mess with y'all. 97% don't view us as the same bloodline. Trigger Happy says, I've heard this before about African is important to saving the world, which again I think is just another form of internationalism or class solidarity when every nation is Trigger Happy gets it, man. You get exactly what I'm trying to say. BB Rodriguez says to Zulism, facts, shaking my head, they said we are not them. Trigger Happy says to Zulism, do you mean all Africans or continental Africans? Mr. Untouchable says, but our Zuli DNA shows that we have multiple variations of their bloodlines, so the science don't support their beliefs. The Zulism says, why would Africans not save the world? Don't y'all say lifestyle in Africa? And Africa is the mother of the world? So why would it not have a save the world complex? I mean, continental Africans don't view us on this side as the same bloodline. That's a Zulism talking. Trigger Happy 262 says, people say that for many reasons, but at least in a politically conscious space, it just means that African people are the oldest in the world. Again, Trigger Happy gets it. Trigger Happy gets it. And these conversations that's going on in the chat, if you guys want, you join the Discord down in the description of the episode. You join the Discord, you go to the Shoot the Breeze section and you post a prompt. And we can continue this in a manner where you guys could hop on the panel and you could voice your opinions. Again, Shoot the Breeze is not a debate show. It's more or less it's supposed to be a kind of a lighthearted conversation about these things, but by all means, come through and speak your part. You know what I mean? Zulism is a regular there. Mr. Untouchable is a regular there on the panel. You know, the Learning Curve is a regular as well. So you guys come through. All right. Let me get back to the paper. Let me just finish these last few comments. BB Rodriguez says truth and reconciliation must be held for West African nations along with Angola and Congo. This blatant disrespect of descendant diaspora is unconscionable. I do, as I've said in the past, I do believe that West Africa needs to step up a bit more. All right? Okay. So this brings us to the third lesson. The third lesson seems to be that we as Afro-Americans have nothing to offer collectively as a basis for the unity of Afro-Americans and continental Africans. Our appeals for unity from the beginning have been both moral and abstract, ideological and external to the realities Africans on the continent recognize, respond to, and respect. They have states, armies, and parties and speak with power. And we meet them as individuals with ideas and skills to sell or give, not as a national personality, not as a collective whole conscious of power realities. Love and brotherhood cannot be sanely attacked, but we can't seriously ask or expect Mozambique or Somalia to denounce the Russians as devils and declare unity with us for just practical reasons, not to mention principles. He has a point there. He does have a point there. We must face the fact that until we speak from a position of power, no one will listen. And if they listen, they won't hear, i.e., won't take us seriously. Right? Even though Afro-Americans spearheaded the calling of the Congress, Tanzania took over the Congress to save it from disintegration because it had the basic ways and means to do it, and we didn't. The guerrilla and established government spoke to us as if we were novices, because we are, as if we were youngsters in politics and poor in power and so on. This is why we've got to stop talking absurdities about Africa as our home and deal with the fact of our being in America, right? So but again, you don't, that's the weird thing with Karenga anyway. If we want to aid Africa, the act must be initiated and carried out right here at the heart and gut of world capitalism. If we are ever to be respected, we must acquire a power base from which to speak and act decisively. This is the reality of the world, including Africa. We can't wish or voodoo it away. That seems kind of derogatory, doesn't it? Finally, though there are obviously other lessons, the fourth lesson seems to be that Pan-Africanism must be removed from the ideological plane and placed on a practical level. That means, first, that if Pan-Africanism assumes a concrete form, it will be because it has a material basis, because it's an economic necessity and practicality. It will not come into being because of Afro-Americans want it and African leaders on the continent use it to mobilize the masses. It will come, if at all, as a serious effort to satisfy the needs Africa has to accumulate surplus in order to end its underdevelopment. As Samir Amin contends, quote, "It is in these terms that the problem of the historical necessity of African unity must be posed. African unity is not sentimental need. It is an objective economic necessity." You can't disagree with that. This also means that real concrete Pan-Africanism will occur only on the continent, and we will then be forced to call global Pan-Africanism what it is, solidarity with Africa, and call humanistic Pan-Africanism what it wants to be, internationalism. This means further that for Pan-Africanism to be real and of any historical importance, it must be socialist in content. Only socialism can expose and end the foreign control of economies and politics in Africa, pull the cover off the excesses of the elite, and mobilize and organize the masses to win and defend real independence. Populism is not socialism. It is only what it means, peopleism. A political game in which the leaders throw the name of the people in the air, pick the pockets of those who look up. Socialism is also more than an attitude of mind you can turn on and off, and more than communalism. So he acknowledges communalism, African communalism. It is an economic system which means the ownership and control by the working class of the means of production, the correct use of surplus, and the end of prestige and luxury projects and long salaries for the elite, the reduction of armies and the formation of people's militias, the rationalization of industry and agriculture, and the people controlling and living their lives fully. Right there in that little definition, you see the problem. Do you guys see the problem of socialism? Right in the definition that he gives. Right? It's frustrating. It's frustrating that we're still having these same conversations today. I see the chat is going off. Let me read through another section because I don't want to hold you guys here much longer. This section is socialism. It must be obvious to us by now that capitalism cannot and will not provide for us, that it is based on the ruthless and endless pursuit of profit, not on moral principles, and thus it couldn't care less about the scars and holes it leaves in our lives. Moreover, it must be equally clear that regardless of our claimed connections with gods and governments, prayers and poverty programs will not end our oppression and exploitation. And the cold and convincing fact is this, that regardless of our religious and racial claims, regardless of whether we turn east or west, we are still actually in the U.S., and our future is directly dependent on how well we grasp this fact and forge from it the correct analysis and conclusions we need in order to end our oppression and make our lives go forward. It is at this point, when in search for a method of analysis, a science of society and struggle, that we of necessity look further left to socialism. At the base and center of socialist concern and commitment is humankind, human beings as man, woman, and child. Socialism is concerned about our life chances, i.e., our opportunities and access to the cultural and material values of society. Moreover, it is concerned about our life activity, labor, our life forces, which is our mental, emotional, and psychological powers, and our life situation, the social conditions under which we live. Socialism carries within it a dual thrust of theory and practice and offers a systematic explanation and a principled and practical answer to social ills and evils where otherwise there would be none. Socialism is committed theoretically and practically to the recognition and realization of human needs, to the definitive elimination of economic and spiritual poverty, which these needs under capitalism have come to mean. Thus, socialism is openly and irreversibly the real negation of an alternative to capitalism. Now, I'm reading all this with what he said in the previous page in mind, by the way, which is just absurd. Socialism begins a struggle to negate capitalism by a scathing, ruthless criticism of it, of everything it is and attempts to be. Okay, that's going to change it. I'm sorry. That's going to change everything. It seeks to correct and clarify the consciousness of the people, to wake the people from their dreams and myths about society, themselves, and the world. It seeks to explain patiently and thoroughly to the people the meaning of their own actions and conditions, and the need to struggle to change those conditions. And through this, change themselves. Carry out this criticism of capitalism and this correction and clarification of consciousness among the people. Socialism focuses on 5 basic human concerns. 1, human material needs. 2, human spiritual needs. 3, the perversion and enslavement of labor. 4, human antagonism. And 5, the private ownership and control of the means of production. All over the world, human material needs have increased and gone unanswered because of the exploitation and oppression imposed on the world by capitalism. Poverty and pain exist where it could be ended. By USA government statistics, over 12 million people in this country are undernourished and hungry, and yet capitalism demands that wheat is burned and milk be poured down gutters to keep profits up. There is enough wealth in the world to feed the world, and people must struggle to recapture and control their resources and to use them to feed, clothe, and shelter themselves as they determine. Well, that part I could get behind, obviously. Right? Is socialism the answer to that? I don't think so. Socialism stresses the satisfaction of material needs because it knows that until men, women, and children get beyond the basic 3, which is food, clothing, and shelter, until they are short of survival, they cannot turn their attention and efforts to higher levels of human activity. Hunger and homelessness are definite limitations on thought, and philosophy comes into being only after there's a surplus to support it. What was I doing? Oh yeah, it was the Shoot the Breeze that passed the other day, Saturday, the last Shoot the Breeze. If you haven't checked that out, make sure to check it out. I was talking about how, like, if I'm choosing, personally, if I'm choosing from talented students, you have 2 Eurasians, some white boy and an Asian, and you have a black person with a 92 average. I know that chances are that black person went through more to have to still be that good with his or her 92 average. Whereas, and these Eurasians will argue that they have 95 and 96 averages. Why don't they get the spot? And that's that. You know, again, I was speaking from my rationalization of that situation, right? Because again, hunger and homelessness are definite limitations on thought. So when you see a kid come through it, you got to give them their props. That's what I was trying to say that day. No, we don't live by bread alone, but we can only come to this conclusion after we've eaten. Words won't feed us. Ideas aren't meat, milk, or vegetables. And hope is not the kind of material out of which houses and clothes are made of. When Zapata said, whatever that is, I don't speak it. He spoke for not just, but hold on a second. When Zapata said, okay, so they put the translation down here. The land belongs to everyone like the air, the water and the warmth of the sun, and those that work it with their own hands have the right to it. He spoke for not just the farm worker, but for the factory worker, the service worker, and all workers who create social wealth. He expressed the fundamental truth that he who works should have the right to his products. There is enough for everyone, but only by the conscious and collective struggle of all oppressed and progressive people will we get it, give it out equally, and protect it from reappropriation by the capitalists. Socialism does not stop with the concern for the satisfaction of the material needs of the people. For as Michael Lerner argues, meeting those needs is not the defining essence of socialism. It is a necessary condition for people to be free and self-determining, but it is not a sufficient one. Slaves may be materially satisfied, but they are slaves nonetheless. Socialism is about power over one's life and circumstances. It is about freedom and self-determination. Thus, socialism is concerned not just with conditions, but consciousness also. Not just with freedom from the burden of unfulfilled material needs, but freedom to grow and develop and realize oneself. It is for this reason socialism analyzes, and seeks to end human alienation. We are alienated from ourselves, from each other, from humanity as a whole, from our work, from our product, and from nature. Alienation is estrangement. The move, consciously or unconsciously, from affection to disaffection, from harmony to disharmony and hostility, from closeness to distance. Capitalism is the source of this, for it is capitalism and the spiritual and material poverty it breeds which forces us apart from each other and from all else of meaning and magnitude in our lives. You know, this sounds like religion, right? So before I get to that this next paragraph, let me check in with the chat, only because I don't want to get too far from when I'm reading, which it has seemingly gotten a little distant. Let me see. BB Rodriguez, Trigger Happy says, to Azuliism, I mean, quite frankly, plenty in the diaspora don't view people on the continent the same as them. But objectively, it's not true. Same for the continent. I agree. BB Rodriguez says, Sir Hilary Beckles finally said that 2 weeks ago, albeit late, it was reassuring. Right? I think she's referring to Truth and Reconciliation. Azuliism says, how do you know the DNA says that? That's what they tell you, bro, at Mr. Untouchable. But I'm not going to reconcile with people who don't want to acknowledge about what they did to us. You know, Azuliism, interestingly enough, is Haitian, but Azuliism speaks like an ADOS FBA type person. The Learning Curve says the propaganda against the African mind is unending. We have access to major markets in the West. Africans partnered with all African diaspora. We could both benefit and be powerful. Azuliism says Haitians or most Black Caribbean nations always say part of our ancestry goes to Africa. Mr. Untouchable says to Azuli, your man is a biologist, bro. Ask him about DNA if you questioning its veracity. Azuliism says Karenga, who's the author of this paper that we're reading, is a bird anyway. Yeah, Karenga has some questionable, although it's funny, I guess maybe because it was Kwanzaa that just passed, but I saw some people saying how, you know, Dr. Clark was wrong about Karenga and that it wasn't the case that he did this, that, and the other. He was an anti-black woman and all this stuff. So I don't know. But I know for a long while we've heard what Dr. Clark had to say about Karenga and what's been reported about him. You know, if anyone wants to do a deeper dive and let me know, please do so and let me know. Trigger Happy says, sure, I can't deny some of that aspect, but you simultaneously can't deny that enslavers made a propaganda structure in which Africa is the quote-unquote dark continent, which fuels disassociation. He's talking to Azuliism. KW Don 7 says, quote, I am not king of all people, I am king of Wakanda. End of quote. That is the attitude of African leadership right now. Absolutely. Azuliism asks the question, who brought about DNA? Oh yeah, the biomaker. Okay. Trigger Happy says, but even further, there are actually some continentals who know the diaspora is their people. Some voodooists have etched on their bodies the names of their ancestors who were taken, he says to Azuliism. Mr. Untouchable says, Azuli, Ghana has publicly apologized for their role in slavery, granted land for diasporans. Sierra Leone has allowed citizenship and the sale of land for diasporans. When has America apologized? Woo! I like that. I like that. That's like the pro-black perspective pointing out the other day, when folks talk about how the U.S. has bases all over Africa, remind them that the U.S. has bases all over America. When y'all talking about the continent apologizing, but you in America, when has America apologized? Azuliism says to Trigger Happy, plus, yes, divide and conquer tactics, and we fall for it every time. Shit makes me sick. But Azuliism, you're falling for it. Trigger Happy 262 says, but you can't necessarily measure the consciousness of people who are unconscious and throw that back at them when it was manufactured that way. I agree with that. Bibi Rodriguez says, greedy corporationist. Capitalism is dangerous, yes. However, to condemn capitalism is flat wrong, even on the continent. Past, we practiced capitalism, had susu bonds, and utilized commerce to our collective. Okay. Azuliism says capitalism with good of standard of living for everyone is the way to do it. A man has to be able to provide for his family, his basic family needs, food, clothing, and shelter. Azuliism goes on to say, if you want more than that, then you have to work harder. Yeah, so I think Azuliism is agreeing with some thoughts I've dropped before, that capitalism, and ultimately this is what I'm going to say, capitalism is really what it is right now. You're going to have to buck up and perform or compete as it is until you have your own economic system that can sustain your people. Problem with black folks is we're not competing enough. When we do compete, we have, as the matron will put it, we have that rugged individualism mindset. That's a sellout mindset when it comes to the collective of the people. We have to find a way to, because within capitalism is socialism, by the way. America has a huge a huge bit of socialism goes on in America, but it's for who? Right? We gotta compete better. That's my opinion of it right now, until we can create a system of our own. Mr. Untouchable says, wait, first Karenga says we must be real and participate in global capitalism. Then he sounds like he's saying socialism is a solution. Which is it? Trigger Happy 262 says food and shelter are probably the building grounds for loyalty as well. Absolutely. Azuliism says capitalism where standard of living for the average person is too high to achieve as criminal. I agree with that. But there has to be a base. And if you want more than you have, to work extra hard. BB Rodriguez sends hearts towards Azuliism for that comment. Trigger Happy 262 says, I think we have to differentiate commerce versus capitalism, just as we have to differentiate communalism versus socialism. So that's a good point. I've talked about that in the show before too. We have to have we have to have a better word for capitalism, I find. The general idea is that we gotta compete. We don't have to put our foot on people's necks. You know what I mean? I think most of our people understand that if you innovate, you deserve a little bit more. If you're innovating, if you're pushing society forward, you deserve a little bit more. I agree with what Erzuliism said as well. There's no need for people not to have their basic needs covered, especially when you look at like the paper just mentions that every night these clowns are throwing away milk and bread and this, that, and the other, as opposed to feeding people who are hungry. They'll just throw the shit in the garbage, right? Like, there's a better way. BB Rodriguez says, I don't want apologies. I need reparations and reparative justice. Now, for the descendants, 2015, all British plantation owners received their last slave recompense checks for freeing our families. Azuliism says to BB, facts. All right, let me try to finish off the paper here now. Capitalism has made us abdicate responsibility, fall in love with things rather than each other, and sacrifice ourselves and each other to get those things. We begin to mistake having and consuming for being and becoming. Capitalism creates false needs in us and pimps and panders those needs until it drains us dry and leaves us empty and economically ruined. Only in a capitalist society where people are out of touch with their bodies can a vagina be used to sum up the value of a woman. Can pictures be sold and substituted for the actual pleasure? We absorb and act out our relation with the oppressor on each other. We are dominated and dehumanized by the oppressor, and we do it to each other. And only socialism can alter this and give us the conditions and consciousness to regain and realize ourselves in ways which are not exploitative and oppressive of others. Labor is the basic activity of life, the basic source of life, and yet it is, under capitalism, turned into an enslavement. It is through labor that we transform nature and ourselves, reduce distances, build the world, and create the basis of higher levels of life. And yet we have lost control of our labor power. We are forced to sell this essential activity in order to survive. It has become now not a conscious and enjoyable activity, but a mindless, non-fulfilling, exhausting activity, an alien activity, which destroys individuality, turns us into objects, and alienates us. Marx summed up this perversion and enslavement of labor when he said, quote, within the capitalist system, all methods for raising the social productiveness of labor are brought about at the cost of the individual laborer. All means for the development of production transform themselves into means of domination over and exploitation of the producers. They, the capitalists, mutilate the laborer into a fragment of a man, degrade him to the level of an appendage of a machine, destroy every remnant of charm in his work, and turn it into a heated toil, and they estrange him from the intellectual potentialities of labor. Again, only socialism can liberate labor and restore it as a self-directed, self-confirming, self-fulfilling activity. The question of antagonism and the primitive ownership and control of the means of production can be treated together for the basic antagonisms of society, i.e., class struggle, racism, and aggressive human alienation, emanate from this unnatural arrangement in which a few owns the basic means of life and exploit labor power and control other areas of life through this. He's off about something in there too. Can you guys pick up on what he's off about there? So the increase in the productivity of labor, people move from survival relations to relations brought about by surplus, more than what is needed to survive. A ruling class comes into being at the first sign of surplus, seizes it, and builds structures to protect and ensure its hold on that surplus. Ownership of the means of production is violently established by a few, and suffering and sacrifice are imposed on the many. Thus, economic antagonisms take root and expand, and class struggle is assured. When the surplus of a given society was seized and labor was divided, fragmented into mental and manual labor, this seizure and division already expressed the seizure and division of the instruments and products of labor. This meant the simultaneous formation of classes, large social groupings, whose power, social position, and interests are determined by their relation to the means of production, by their ownership of factories, farms, land, mines, etc., or their propertylessness. We live in a class period of history and in a class society, and thus we are members of a given class, whether we like it or not, or reject it because we think white folks made it up. If there are classes in the USA, all of us who live here, who work, struggle, dance, and die here, are members of a definite class. The whole society has shaped the parts, us, has conditioned our consciousness and imposed on us a position and function in the overall system, a capitalist class system. Thus, a class analysis, an analysis of class structure, class forces, class interests, class history, and class struggle in the USA and the world is of vital importance if we are to understand the whole of who we are, our history, our strengths and weaknesses, our friends and enemies, our potential and possibilities. This is a basic lesson of socialism. To negate and provide a real and revolutionary alternative to capitalism, socialism seeks to put truth into action, for it understands that all social problems are solved in the final analysis by social practice, and that ultimately the most effective argument against the existing order is collective action against it. Socialism as practice seeks to establish workers' ownership and control of means of production. It does not seek to appropriate personal property, which people use, only private property, which capitalists use to buy people and labor and to control other areas of life. Secondly, it seeks to institute an egalitarian distribution of all wealth so that everyone can meet their needs without hoarding, hustling, or hiring others. Let me just pause here. I know it's the middle of a paragraph, but does the innate human condition, right? I want y'all to follow this question I'm asking. Does the innate nature or the nature of humans really allow for this stuff? Right? Does it allow for, as we talked about earlier, like in the chat and in previous episodes, does it allow for, like, I'm a producer, like if I'm a person, I'm an innovator, I'm a thinker, I'm a doer, right? And I have other thinkers and doers around me, and we're cool. Would we want this system where at the end of the day I get the same thing that the non-productive get? Is that a human, would human nature, innate human nature, allow for that? Thirdly, it seeks a planned economy, which the workers plan and execute so that the workers can exercise their minds again and waste through duplication and planned obsolescence will be ended. Fourthly, it seeks to establish and guard a real political and industrial democracy in which free and full debate and collective decision-making among the people are real, and in which the working class really controls their lives and pushes their lives forward. Finally, socialism is a science of struggle. Socialism as a science of struggle seeks the unity of all oppressed and progressive people, so that a conscious and committed united front can be formed to end the reign and rape of capital and begin socialist construction. In fact, there can be no separate solution, no separate peace with the oppressor. National liberation, women's liberation, and all other liberations of necessity means socialist liberation. In the final analysis, all struggles must become one struggle, the struggle for socialist liberation. It will not be an easy task to merge our struggles or to defeat capitalism, but we actually have no choice if we are ever to end our oppression and exploitation and become free and productive humans again. Thus, it is our revolutionary duty to face reality squarely, not to seek the line of least resistance, to call things by their right names, to speak the truth to the masses, no matter how bitter it may be, not to fear obstacles, to be true in little things, to base one's program on the logic of class struggle, and to be bold when the hour of action arrives. That's from Leon Trotsky, from The Death Agony of Capitalism. This is just a small part of what we must do, of what the masses will expect from us, and of what liberation and higher levels of life require. Let us move forward then, patient and thorough in our work, conscious and committed in our struggle, terribly audacious in our example. That's the end of the paper. Which path do you guys resonate with? I personally think our boy here is kind of all over the place. But which road do you agree with? Right? You guys post which road you prefer our people to take, right? And on the other side of this last station ID, I'll read all your comments, including which road, nationalism, Pan-Africanism, socialism, do you plan to take? Or is there a fourth road, right? You let me know.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is D Webb with the Harsh Reality Podcast, asking you to tune in where we tackle the news of the day that affects our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
Greetings, fam. Tune in to The Learning Curve with me, the revolutionary matron on KWAZ Radio.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure you're checking out all the other shows on KWAZ Radio. Make sure you're subscribed to KWAZ's YouTube channel. Again, Thursday. I'll be doing the Thursday shows over there. Make sure you're subscribed. In the chat, Mr. Untouchable says to BB Rodriguez, reparative justice is an unquantifiable phrase. How do you go about repairing people who have been psychologically and culturally destroyed? With money? Zuliism says to Mr. Untouchable, damn, that's a great point. I guess we need mental, psychological reparations is needed. B. Rodriguez says to Mr. Untouchable, unquantifiable? Hold on. Yeah, she says, unquantifiable? I think it keeps moving. It throws me off. She says, it's ending mass incarceration and these bogus sentences of our men and boys is a start. I'm not letting these pieces of shit off. Pharaoh justice now. Mr. Untouchable says, LOL, okay. BB Rodriguez goes on to say to Mr. Untouchable, as for reparations, this argument that money can't repair badly damaged people is a false ideology to hold. We are not beyond repair, and funds secured can create the right type of healing. The thing about reparations, though, I think I heard only talk about this some years back. I've heard Umar talk about it as well. Is you get reparations in this white man's land. All you got to do is, like I talked about earlier with this inflation in the vegan restaurant, all you got to do is like raise the cost of living, raise the price of like staple products. We saw that actually during the pandemic here in the U.S. We rarely, if ever, saw sales on like in the grocery stores, right? He could make a loaf of bread the price of a loaf of bread in Guyana right now, you know, and there goes your money, you know. So you have to be careful about that just that money thing. You have to be careful about that. KW Don 7 says he chooses the Pan-African nationalism road. Okay. B. Rodriguez says, so money to rebuild neighborhoods and build businesses, healing centers for mind and body won't help with repair. I mean, they can help, but there's a deeper thing going on too. That involves, again, you have to have your own economy. If you're in this guy's economy, what use is that money in his economy? All you're going to end up doing is enriching, again, supply chain, right? You're just going to enrich every Arab, Asian, and white boy there is out there. You know, Trigger Happy 262 says, I think we have to take a Pan-African nationalist road that is a more overarching and international racial building as opposed to some humanist fantasy. Black nationalism alone isn't enough without a larger apparatus that aids in building such a nation. The social union was able to push, I think he meant the Soviet Union, was able to push communism globally because it was such a large apparatus. We need our large apparatus. That I agree with. Mr. Untouchable says, the path I take is land. We need land free and without any encumbrances. We'll figure out the rest after that. So yeah, I mean, the fact that you put in free and without any encumbrances is an interesting little caveat there, because I could point to the fact that we have land on the continent, you know. But is it free and without any encumbrances? It's a different story, you know. Again, we could have this kind of conversation again where you guys can have your voices heard, your thoughts heard. If you post this as a prompt, I think Mr. Untouchable said he did that already. Right? We could further these conversations during Shoot the Breeze. As a matter of fact, tonight I messed up. I was supposed to set this up on StreamYard, so that if folks wanted to jump in during the reading and have conversations during the reading, we could have done that. And I totally forgot. I'm so used to doing it this way. So come Thursday on, I'll be doing it in such a way where you guys could just click the link, jump on the panel, and have discussions or have your thoughts heard. All right. BB Rodriguez says, Koku, that part, our own economy, my money doesn't support outside communities. And that's what you would have to have. You'd have to have that economy. or have the apparatus set up for your economy upon receiving these reparations. Folks got to think about that stuff heavy too. It's not just as simple as a lot of folks have this real childlike mentality, and it's pushed by these grifters to, cut the check. Yeah, cut the check, but then what? You'll be without that money in just a matter of a few years. Even this idea, I saw some people pushing like, oh yeah, if you cut me my check, I'll open some casinos like them Indians. Oh yeah? Who's going to the casino? Who's going to your casinos? Once they know who owns it, who's going to it? So there's all those things to consider. But if you work in terms of land, in terms of your own people, you can make some stuff happen. And that's what we got to do. We have to work in terms of race, which is funny. A lot of people call themselves race first. But then you find out that it's really nationality first. But once we start working along the lines of our race, our shared history, regardless of what people might want to say about Africa, once we work along the lines of, I believe communalism is a big part of the economics that we need. Once we start to work along those lines, I think we'll be fine. But it's to get people to work along those lines. I want to thank you guys for coming through tonight. Truly. Again, I'll be back on Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the KWAZ Radio YouTube channel. Tune in over there to catch the show. And then, of course, I'll be back on Saturday for Shoot the Breeze. I want to thank all of you who were here tonight. BB Rodriguez, Trigger Happy 262, Mr. Untouchable from the hometown, KW Don 7, Azuliism was here. Who else am I missing? Did I miss anyone else? The Learning Curve, the Revolutionary Matron was here as well. And if I missed anyone else, it's not because I did that intentionally. It's just because I can't see your name in the chat right now. Thank all of you for being here. I'll see you guys again on Thursday on the other channel. You guys be good. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.